The moment he pressed the button, I felt the unmistakable jolt. And from the way Lucas's eyes widened, I knew he realized exactly what it controlled. It was supposed to be my private indulgence, a way to escape the crushing monotony of my days in this house. Philip was always away on business, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the deafening silence of a too-big home. But now, standing in the living room with Lucas staring at me in stunned realization, my secret was out. "What the hell?" he muttered, looking down at the small remote in his hand before his gaze snapped back to me. I tried to recover, to pretend it wasn't what he thought it was, but my body betrayed me. The heat in my cheeks, the way I couldn't meet his eyes, it all told him the truth I desperately wanted to deny. His voice dropped, quiet and incredulous. "This is yours, isn't it?" "Lucas, don't," I whispered, taking a step back. But he wasn't letting this go. He stepped closer, holding the remote up like evidence in a courtroom. "So what happens if I press it again?" "Lucas." Click. I gasped, my breath hitching as the device in question did exactly what it was designed to do. My knees felt weak and I gripped the edge of the couch for balance. His expression shifted then, the teasing smirk fading into something darker, more intense. And that was the moment everything changed. Philip had always been a man of ambition, a trait I once admired, but now resented. Our marriage began with promises of partnership, of a life shared equally. But somewhere along the way, I became an accessory, a piece of decor in his carefully curated existence. He worked tirelessly, his focus always on the next deal, the next merger, the next flight to somewhere far away. At first I tried to fill the void. I threw myself into renovating our sprawling home, hosting dinners and volunteering for local charities, but the novelty wore off, and the loneliness set in. A quiet ache that grew louder with every passing year. The arrival of Lucas hadn't helped. Lucas was Philip's son from his first marriage, a boy I had barely known until he came to live with us. At 23, he was everything Philip wasn't: impulsive, passionate, and unapologetically honest. He had a way of filling a room, his presence magnetic in a way that made it impossible to ignore him. He had returned from college a few months earlier, after a fight with his mother about his future. Philip, ever the fixer, offered him a place to stay while he figured things out. I suspected it was more about control than kindness. Philip had never been one to let loose ends dangle, and Lucas's independence was a thread he couldn't ignore. I didn't expect to feel anything for Lucas beyond the polite indifference of a stepmother. But from the moment he arrived, there was a tension between us, unspoken, unacknowledged, but always there. The day everything changed started like any other. Philip had left early for a week-long business trip, leaving the house unusually quiet. I spent the morning tidying up, trying to chase away the restlessness that had been creeping in for weeks. I was in the living room, rearranging the throw pillows on the couch, when Lucas wandered in. He was barefoot, his hair still damp from the shower, and carrying a coffee mug with the words "World's Okayest Son" emblazoned on the side. "Morning," he said, flopping onto the couch. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile. He picked up the TV remote, flipping aimlessly through channels. "You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," I said, though his casual presence had already unsettled me. As he leaned back, his hand brushed something nestled between the couch cushions. Frowning, he reached down and pulled it out. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the small black remote. My stomach dropped. I recognized it instantly, the sleek, discreet controller I thought I had tucked away safely. "Nothing," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. He raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "Nothing, huh? Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" "Lucas, give it to me," I said, stepping toward him. He pulled it back, his grin widening. "Relax, I'm just curious. What's it for? Some kind of sound system?" I reached for the remote, but he dodged me, holding it out of reach. "Lucas, I'm serious. Give it back." And that's when he pressed the button. The look on his face shifted instantly as the realization dawned. His smirk faded, replaced by something else entirely: curiosity, amusement, and a flicker of something darker. "This is yours?" he asked, his tone soft but deliberate. I didn't answer, my face burning with shame. "Oh, it is," he said, leaning back against the couch. "Interesting. Lucas, please, just give it to me, and let's forget this ever happened." He tilted his head, studying me like he was seeing me for the first time. I don't think I can forget this. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling as I reached for the remote again. But he didn't move, his eyes locked on mine. What else are you hiding, Evelyn? He asked, his voice dropping lower. Lucas, stop, I whispered, but my words sounded weak even to me. He leaned forward, holding the remote just out of reach. Why? Are you afraid I'll find out who you really are? Something inside me snapped then, the weight of years spent pretending to be someone I wasn't crashing down all at once. You don't know anything about me, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Then tell me, he said, his tone soft but insistent. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The tension between us was unbearable, the air charged with everything we weren't saying. And then, without thinking, I grabbed the remote from his hand and stormed out of the room. I spent the rest of the day avoiding him, the weight of the encounter pressing down on me like a physical force. But, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the memory of his voice, his gaze, the way he had looked at me like he was seeing through every mask I had ever worn. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard a soft knock at my door. Evelyn? His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't answer, my heart racing as I listened to him open the door and step inside. We need to talk, he said, his tone softer now. Go back to bed, Lucas, I said, my voice trembling. He didn't move. Not until you tell me the truth. I turned to face him, my breath catching as I saw the intensity in his eyes. What truth? I whispered. His gaze didn't waver. The truth about you. About us. His words lingered in the dark like an open door, daring me to step through. The truth about us. The room felt suffocating, my thoughts colliding with one another as I struggled to find solid ground. There is no us, Lucas, I said, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, his silhouette framed by the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the curtains. You don't believe that? Not after today. I sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around me like it could shield me from the weight of his gaze. What happened today was a mistake, a misunderstanding. You keep telling yourself that, he said, his tone calm but unrelenting. But we both know it's more than that. I wanted to deny it, to push him away, but the truth was already clawing its way to the surface. The days that followed were a blur of tension and carefully avoided glances. Lucas seemed content to wait, to let me wrestle with my own thoughts while he carried on as though nothing had changed. But it had. Every time we passed each other in the house, the air felt heavier, charged with unspoken words and stolen glances. It was a quiet afternoon when the dam finally broke. Philip was still away, the house silent except for the faint hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. I was folding laundry in the living room when Lucas walked in, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said, his voice steady but firm. I didn't look up. There's nothing to talk about. Stop lying to yourself, Evelyn, he said, stepping closer. You're not afraid of this because it's wrong. You're afraid because it feels right. I dropped the shirt in my hands, the words cutting through my defenses like a blade. Don't, I whispered. Don't what? He asked, his tone softer now. Don't tell the truth, or don't remind you of what you already know. I turned to face him, my chest tightening as I met his gaze. You don't understand what you're saying. I understand more than you think, he said, his eyes searching mine. I've watched you, Evelyn. I've seen how lonely you are, how hard you try to hide it. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, and I looked away, unable to hold his gaze any longer. This isn't about me. It is, he said, stepping closer. And it's about me too. I'm not some kid, Evelyn. I know what I feel, and I think you feel it too. His words hung between us, daring me to deny them, but I couldn't. The first time it happened, it was almost an accident. We were in the library, a room Philip rarely used, but one I had claimed as my sanctuary. I was standing by the window, staring out at the garden, when Lucas walked in. I didn't mean to scare you, he said, his voice low. You didn't, I replied, though my hands trembled as I set down the book I hadn't been reading. He closed the door behind him, his footsteps soft against the carpet as he crossed the room. I've been thinking about you. Lucas, I can't stop, he said, cutting me off. No matter how much I try, I can't get you out of my head. I turned to face him, my heart pounding as he stopped just inches away. This has to stop. He shook his head, his eyes locking on mine. You don't want it to stop, neither do I. His words were a catalyst, breaking through the last of my resistance. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I reached for him, my fingers brushing against his as he closed the distance between us. The days that followed were both exhilarating and terrifying. We were careful, always watching for signs of prying eyes or suspicious glances. The house became a minefield of secrets, each room holding its own risks and rewards. In the kitchen, our hands brushed as we passed each other by the sink. In the hallway, a fleeting touch on my arm sent shivers down my spine. In the library, under the cover of shadows, we whispered confessions that felt more dangerous than any physical act. But the thrill of secrecy came with its own price. Every stolen moment was a reminder of the line we had crossed, the rules we had broken, and the lives we were risking. The first real threat to our secret came in the form of Victor, Lucas's childhood friend. He had stopped by unannounced one evening, his easy charm masking a sharp wit that made me uneasy. "Nice place you've got here," Victor said, his gaze lingering on the family photos lining the mantel. "Lucas always said his dad married well." I forced a polite smile, feeling Lucas stiffen beside me. "We like it," I said simply. Victor smirked, his eyes flickering between the two of us. "You seem close," he said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. "Victor," Lucas said, his voice edged with warning. "Let's not make this awkward." Victor held up his hands in mock surrender, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't done digging. Later that night, Lucas found me in the kitchen, his expression tense. "He knows something," he said, his voice low. "Victor?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "He's not stupid," Lucas replied. "And he's always been jealous of me. If he figures this out—" I didn't need him to finish the sentence. The stakes were already high enough without adding another player to the game. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lucas reached for my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We stick to the plan. No one finds out." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. The balance we'd precariously maintained began to tilt, and it wasn't long before cracks started to appear in our carefully constructed facade. The first complication came from Philip's business associate, Emma, a sharp and ambitious woman with a penchant for prying where she wasn't welcome. Emma had always been a fixture in Philip's professional life, attending his dinners, overseeing his projects, and inserting herself into his personal affairs whenever the opportunity arose. She was charming in a way that disarmed most people, but I had never trusted her. It started innocuously enough. Emma stopped by one afternoon while Philip was away, armed with a bottle of wine and an air of false camaraderie. "I thought you might appreciate some company," she said, handing me the bottle with a too bright smile. I forced a smile, ushering her into the kitchen. "That's kind of you, Emma. I wasn't expecting anyone." She shrugged, her eyes sweeping the room with the precision of someone cataloging every detail. "Philip mentioned you've been spending more time at home lately. I thought I'd check in." Her words were casual, but there was an edge to them that made me uneasy. "Just keeping things in order while he's away," I said, keeping my tone light. Emma's gaze flickered to the open door leading to the hallway. "And Lucas? How's he adjusting?" I froze for half a second. Barely noticeable, but enough to make my heart race. "He's fine. Why do you ask?" Emma tilted her head, a coy smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, no reason. He's just grown up quite a bit since I last saw him, don't you think?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Later that evening, I found Lucas in the study, his expression tense as he stared out the window. "Emma was here," I said quietly, closing the door behind me. He turned to face me, his jaw tightening. "What did she want?" "To make herself comfortable," I replied, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. Lucas stepped closer, his brow furrowing. "She suspects something, doesn't she?" "I don't know," I admitted, sinking into one of the armchairs. "But she's watching us. I can feel it." Lucas knelt in front of me, his hands resting on the arms of the chair. "We'll handle her," he said, his voice low and steady. "Lucas—" "No," he interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. "I won't let her ruin this. I won't let anyone ruin this." The second complication came from Victor. His arrival was as unexpected as it was unwelcome. He showed up late one night, grinning like he owned the place, his usual bravado in full force. "Thought I'd crash here for a bit," he announced, dropping his duffel bag in the foyer. Lucas stiffened beside me, his posture immediately defensive. "You could have called," he said, his tone clipped. Victor smirked, clapping Lucas on the shoulder. Where's the fun in that? He turned to me, his smile widening. You don't mind, do you, Evelyn? Of course not, I said, though my stomach churned at the thought of him staying under our roof. Victor's presence was a constant source of tension. He had a way of inserting himself into every conversation, every interaction, his sharp wit always teetering on the edge of something cruel. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Victor leaned back in his chair, his gaze flickering between Lucas and me. You two have gotten close, he remarked, his tone light but probing. Lucas stiffened, his jaw tightening. We live in the same house, Victor. What do you expect? Victor chuckled, swirling his glass of whiskey. Fair point, but still. You seem to spend an awful lot of time together. I forced a laugh, hoping to diffuse the tension. Lucas has been helping me with some projects around the house. It's been a nice distraction. Victor's smirk didn't waver. I'll bet. The tipping point came one afternoon when Victor and Emma crossed paths at the house. Emma had stopped by unannounced again, her curiosity clearly piqued. Victor, ever the opportunist, wasted no time ingratiating himself with her. Their conversation filled with thinly veiled barbs and veiled glances in my direction. Quite the setup you've got here, Emma remarked, her gaze lingering on the family photos lining the mantel. Victor grinned, leaning against the arm of the couch. Oh, you should see the dynamics. It's fascinating. Emma's smile was sharp, her eyes narrowing slightly. I'll bet it is. That evening, as I paced in the kitchen, Lucas stormed in, his frustration evident. Victor's going to ruin everything, he said, slamming a glass onto the counter. I know, I replied, my voice trembling. He's already sniffing around, and now Emma's in the mix. It's only a matter of time before one of them puts the pieces together. What do we do? I asked, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Lucas leaned against the counter, his head in his hands. We need to get ahead of this, before they do. The tension in the house was unbearable, every moment a careful dance around the truth. But no matter how hard we tried, the walls were closing in. The first crack appeared when Emma cornered me in the hallway, her tone casual but her words cutting. You've been quiet lately, Evelyn, she said, her smile sharp. Anything you'd like to share? I forced a laugh, shaking my head. Not at all, just busy with the house. Emma tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. Funny. That's what Philip said the last time we talked. My breath caught, but I managed to keep my expression neutral. And what exactly did he say? Emma's smile widened. Just that things seem different around here. That night, Lucas and I met in the library, the weight of the day pressing down on us. We're running out of time, he said, his voice low. I know, I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. Lucas stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. We'll figure it out. Together. But even as he said it, I could feel the walls closing in. The inevitable truth waiting to shatter everything we had built. The confrontation was inevitable. With Victor's sharp intuition and Emma's prying eyes, the threads of our secret were unraveling faster than I could hold them together. Every glance, every stray word felt like a trap, a moment that might give away the truth. The tipping point came on a stormy evening. Rain battered the windows and the sound of thunder rolled through the house. Philip had returned unexpectedly, his presence filling the space with a quiet tension. He was in the study with Emma, discussing business, or so I thought, while Lucas and I tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy. But everything fell apart when Philip called me into the study. I entered hesitantly, my palms damp as I smoothed the fabric of my blouse. Emma was perched on the edge of the desk, her expression carefully neutral, but there was a gleam in her eyes that made my stomach twist. Philip stood by the window, his back to me, one hand clutching a tumbler of scotch. Close the door, he said without turning around. I obeyed, my heart pounding. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Philip turned, his face unreadable. I think you know. Philip, stop, he interrupted, his tone sharp. He gestured to Emma, who slid a folder across the desk toward me. I picked it up, my hands trembling as I flipped it open. Inside were photos, grainy but damning, of Lucas and me. In the garden, in the library. Even in the kitchen, our stolen glances captured like pieces of evidence in a trial. My breath caught and I looked up to find Philip staring at me, his expression a mix of betrayal and fury. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You tell me," Philip said, his voice cold. Lucas burst into the study then, his presence like a thunderclap. "What's going on?" he demanded, his eyes darting between Philip and me. "Perfect timing," Philip said, his sarcasm biting. He held up one of the photos. "Care to explain this?" Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "You've been spying on us?" "Spying?" Philip barked a humorless laugh. "You think I need to spy to know when something's wrong in my own house?" "Philip, this isn't what you think," I began, but he cut me off. "Don't insult me, Evelyn. You've been lying to me for months, both of you." Emma cleared her throat, her voice smooth and calculated. "Maybe we should all take a step back. Emotions are running high." "Stay out of this, Emma," Lucas snapped, his anger flaring. Emma raised her hands in mock surrender, but the smirk on her face made it clear she was enjoying the spectacle. The argument spiraled out of control, accusations flying back and forth. Philip accused Lucas of betrayal, of exploiting my loneliness. Lucas fired back, calling Philip a neglectful husband who only cared about his image. "You were never there for her," Lucas shouted. "You left her alone in this house like a ghost. And you decided you'd be the one to comfort her?" Philip retorted, his voice dripping with contempt. I stood frozen, my heart breaking as the two most important men in my life tore each other apart. The breaking point came when Emma dropped her final bombshell. "You know, Philip," she began, her tone almost casual, "if you're looking for loyalty, maybe you should take a closer look at your own affairs." Philip froze, his glare snapping to her. "What the hell are you talking about?" Emma smiled, her victory complete. "Oh, come on. Did you really think I didn't know? All those late nights? The trips with clients? You've been playing this game a lot longer than Evelyn." The room went silent, the weight of her words settling over us like a suffocating fog. "You're lying," Philip said, his voice low and dangerous. Emma shrugged. "Believe what you want, but maybe you should think twice before throwing stones." Philip stormed out of the room, his fury palpable. Emma followed, her smirk still in place. Lucas and I were left alone in the aftermath, the silence between us heavy with everything unsaid. "This is my fault," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "No," Lucas said, stepping closer. "This is on him, on them, not you." I shook my head, my guilt threatening to consume me. "I've ruined everything." Lucas cupped my face in his hands, his gaze steady. "You haven't ruined anything. We're going to get through this, together." I wanted to believe him, but the storm we had unleashed felt unstoppable. The next day, the photos were leaked. I don't know how they got out, Emma's meddling, Philip's rage, or Victor's jealousy, but by morning, our lives were front-page news. The headlines were brutal, painting us as villains in a scandal that consumed the town. Philip issued a statement, cold and calculated, framing himself as the wronged party. "Betrayal by those closest to you is the deepest cut," he said in one interview, his voice heavy with manufactured sorrow. Lucas and I were vilified, our names dragged through the mud by tabloids hungry for drama. The walls of the house felt like a prison, the whispers and stares of the outside world closing in. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lucas packed a bag. "We can't stay here," he said, his tone resolute. "Where will we go?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Anywhere but here," he replied. "As long as we're together." I looked around the house, the life I had built crumbling before my eyes. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't face it without him. Taking his hand, I stepped into the unknown, leaving behind everything but the promise of what we could be. The drive was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the tires on the asphalt. Lucas stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, while I gripped the edge of my seat, my fingers aching from how hard I was clenching them. Every mile we put between us and the house felt like a breath of air after drowning, but it wasn't enough to erase the weight of what we'd left behind. The motel Lucas found was small and unassuming, tucked along the edge of a forgotten highway. The fluorescent sign buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. "We'll stay here for the night," he said as he grabbed our bags from the back seat. I nodded, too drained to argue. Inside the room, I sank onto the bed, my hands trembling. The news had already begun to spread. My phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and messages, each one another thread tying me to the wreckage we'd left behind. I turned it off, dropping it onto the nightstand like it burned my skin. Lucas knelt in front of me, his hands resting gently on my knees. "Hey," he said softly, his voice pulling me back to the present. "We're going to get through this." I met his eyes, searching for the confidence I lacked. "How? Everything's falling apart." "Let it," he said firmly. "Let it all fall apart. We'll start over, just you and me." Tears filled my eyes as I shook my head. "You don't understand. This will follow us forever. People won't forget." "Then we'll make them forget," he said, his grip on me tightening. "Or we'll learn to live with it. But I'm not letting them take you from me." His words were a lifeline, grounding me when I felt like I was spinning out of control. I wanted to believe him, to believe that we could find a way out of this mess together. But the world wasn't so easily escaped. By morning, the scandal had reached its peak. Photos of Lucas and me were plastered across every news outlet, the headlines vicious. "Stepfamily scandal rocks elite circles," one read. Another declared, "From housewife to headline, the affair that shattered a family." Lucas sat beside me, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable. "They're painting us like monsters," he muttered. "They're not wrong," I whispered, the guilt weighing on me. He turned to me sharply, his voice fierce. "Don't say that. You're not a monster, Evelyn. You're human. And you don't owe anyone an apology for that." The motel phone rang suddenly, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet. Lucas and I exchanged a glance before he picked it up. "Hello?" His expression darkened as he listened. "We're not interested," he said before slamming the phone down. "Who was it?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "Reporters," he said grimly. "They found us." By the time we left the motel, the reporters were already circling. A black sedan was parked near the entrance, its occupants pretending to check a map while their cameras peeked through the cracked windows. Lucas noticed them first and tightened his grip on my hand. "Don't look at them," he whispered, leading me to the car. I nodded, keeping my head down as we slid inside. The engine roared to life, and Lucas wasted no time pulling out of the lot, the sedan following at a distance. "Where do we go now?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Somewhere they won't find us," he replied, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. We ended up in a small coastal town hours away, a place where the salty breeze carried with it the promise of anonymity. The motel we found was older but clean, its cracked sign advertising ocean views that were barely visible through the fog. I stood by the window of our room, watching the waves crash against the shore as Lucas paced behind me. The tension between us was palpable, the weight of everything we'd lost pressing down on us. "You regret this, don't you?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. I turned to face him, my chest tightening. "What?" "Coming with me," he said, his tone laced with pain. "Leaving everything behind." I hesitated, the truth too complicated to put into words. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "I don't know what I feel anymore." His expression softened, and he stepped closer, taking my hands in his. "I know it's not easy, but I meant what I said. I'll never let them take you from me. We'll find a way to move forward, together." I wanted to believe him, to believe that the storm we had weathered was behind us. But as I looked into his eyes, I couldn't shake the doubt lingering in the back of my mind. The days turned into weeks, and we settled into a tenuous routine. Lucas found odd jobs to keep us afloat, while I kept a low profile, avoiding the outside world as much as possible. But the whispers of our past were never far away. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar face felt like a threat, a reminder that the scandal we had left behind could find us at any moment. One evening, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Lucas reached for my hand. "Do you think we'll ever be free of this?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know I don't want to face it alone." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and pink, I let myself believe, for the first time in a long time, that we might find peace. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I never expected my boss's daughter would be the one to set my life on fire. But here I am, pressed against the wall of a hotel suite, her lips trailing fire along my neck, her hands gripping my waist as if letting go wasn't an option. I knew it was wrong, dangerous even, but that only made it harder to stop. When I first met Ava, I saw her the way everyone else did. the boss's golden girl. Beautiful, headstrong, a little spoiled but undeniably magnetic. She was the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room. Her confidence pulled you in, her energy lingered long after she left. I'd been working at her father's company, a mid-sized marketing firm, for over a decade. I started as a project manager fresh out of my divorce, determined to build a stable life for myself. Over the years, I climbed the ladder to operations manager, earning my place as one of the most trusted members of the team. My work was my sanctuary, a place where I was in control, where nothing unpredictable ever happened. Until Ava. She was only 23, barely a year out of college when she started showing up at the office last summer. At first, it seemed harmless. She was just shadowing her father, sitting in on meetings, learning the ropes. I assumed she'd get bored and move on to something more glamorous, something that suited her fiery personality better than spreadsheets and campaign strategies. But she didn't. Ava started spending more time in my orbit. She'd stop by my office with some flimsy excuse. A question about a project she wasn't even assigned to, or a casual remark about the team dynamics. At first, I thought she was just curious, maybe trying to learn the business from someone other than her father. But then I noticed the way she looked at me. It wasn't the kind of look you give a mentor. I caught her watching me during meetings, her gaze lingering a little too long when she thought I wasn't paying attention. There was something playful in her smile, something teasing in the way she leaned just a little too close when she stood by my desk. I told myself I was imagining it. Why would someone like her be interested in someone like me? I was 43, divorced, and entirely too practical for the kind of bold, reckless energy she radiated. She was young, gorgeous, and had the kind of confidence that came from a life of never being told no. But then came the business trip. It was a simple overnight stay at a hotel downtown for a client pitch. Nothing out of the ordinary. But that trip changed everything. That night, in her suite, after one too many glasses of wine and a conversation that veered far too personal, Ava kissed me, and I didn't stop her. Now, as her lips press against mine, her body warm and insistent against me, I know I've crossed a line I can't uncross. And I don't care. I wasn't supposed to notice her. That was what I told myself in the weeks leading up to the trip. Ava had been coming around the office more often, drifting through meetings with her notebook in hand, always asking just enough questions to seem engaged. It was obvious she wasn't particularly interested in the day-to-day operations of the business. She was there for appearances, maybe to make her father feel better about eventually passing the reins to her. But even as I tried to keep her in the periphery of my thoughts, Ava kept drawing my attention. It wasn't just her looks, though they were impossible to ignore. She had a striking beauty, the kind that seemed effortless. Wavy chestnut hair that always looked perfectly tousled, dark eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a smile that could switch from playful to knowing in an instant. It was more than that, though. Ava had this energy about her, a restless, magnetic presence that made it hard to look away. She wasn't like the other people in the office who kept their heads down and focused on their tasks. She moved with purpose, like she was always about to do something bold, something unexpected. And then there were the looks. I started catching her watching me in meetings. At first I thought it was my imagination. I was used to being the calm, dependable one in the room, the person no one paid much attention to unless they needed something fixed. But Ava's gaze lingered in a way that felt different, intense, like she was waiting for me to notice. I told myself I was being ridiculous. She was my boss's daughter, and I was 20 years older than her. There was no way she was looking at me the way I thought she was. But then, little things started happening. She'd stop by my office with no real reason, leaning against the doorframe like she had all the time in the world. Her questions were casual, but her tone wasn't. "So," she said one afternoon, tilting her head slightly, "do you ever get tired of all this?" "All this?" I asked, glancing up from my laptop. "Work, the meetings, the endless emails. Doesn't it get boring?" I shrugged. "It's predictable. I like that." "Predictable," she repeated, rolling the word around in her mouth like it tasted foreign. "Doesn't sound very exciting." "Not everything has to be exciting," I replied, keeping my tone light. She didn't say anything, just gave me a small, almost mischievous smile before walking away. When my boss asked me to join Ava on the client pitch trip, I hesitated. It wasn't unusual for me to attend these meetings. Part of my role was managing client relationships, but the idea of spending an overnight trip with Ava felt risky. Still, I didn't have a good reason to decline. So, on a Thursday morning, I found myself climbing into a sleek black car with her, headed for a luxury hotel downtown. The first day was uneventful. We met with the client, reviewed the pitch, and ironed out the last-minute details. Ava was charming, quick-witted, and undeniably effective in the meeting. Watching her in action, I felt a strange mix of admiration and wariness. She had this ability to command attention, to draw people in without trying too hard. That night, after dinner with the client, we ended up at the hotel bar. It was a polished, dimly lit space with sleek leather chairs and an expensive menu. I told myself I'd have one drink and then call it a night. But Ava had other plans. "You can't leave me here drinking alone," she said, sliding onto the bar stool next to mine. I hesitated, glancing at the half-empty glass of wine in front of her. "I thought you said you weren't much of a drinker." "I'm not," she said, grinning, "but tonight feels like an exception." I ordered another drink, telling myself it was harmless. Just two coworkers unwinding after a long day. But the conversation started to shift. It began innocently enough, talking about the meeting, the client, the challenges of the campaign. But then Ava started steering the conversation toward me. "So Claire," she said, resting her chin on her hand, "do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" I asked, frowning. "Not taking risks, playing it safe." I bristled slightly at her tone, but there was no malice in it, only curiosity. "I've taken risks," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow. "Have you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I got divorced at 35, I said, trying to inject some humor into my voice. "That's a risk." She laughed, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "That's not a risk. That's survival." I looked at her then, really looked at her. The way her lips curved around her wine glass, the way her dark eyes sparkled in the dim light. There was something disarming about her in that moment, something that made it hard to keep my guard up. "What about you?" I asked, deflecting. "What risks have you taken?" "Plenty," she said with a smirk, "but I think I'm about to take another one." Before I could respond, she reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. It was a simple gesture, but it felt deliberate, intimate in a way that left me momentarily stunned. "Ava?" "Relax," she said softly, her fingers lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. I wanted to tell her to stop, to remind her of the boundaries we shouldn't be crossing. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I finished my drink, feeling the warmth of the alcohol spreading through me, loosening something inside me that I'd kept tightly wound for years. Later that night, back in my room, I couldn't stop replaying the way she'd looked at me. The intensity in her eyes, the way her touch had lingered. I told myself to sleep, to push it out of my mind. But just as I was beginning to drift off, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Ava was standing there, barefoot, wearing a loose button-down shirt that barely reached her thighs. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I knew I should have said no. I knew I should have closed the door and drawn the line right there. But instead, I stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me, her bare feet silent on the carpet. When she turned to face me, there was no hesitation in her eyes anymore. "Ava, I don't think." "Stop thinking," she interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "Just let this happen." And then she kissed me. The moment Ava's lips met mine, my mind went blank. It wasn't soft, hesitant, or unsure. It was bold and deliberate, like she knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't going to wait for permission. I froze at first, torn between the instinct to pull away and the undeniable heat spreading through me. Her hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer. I could feel her fingers grip the fabric of my shirt, the tension in her body as if she were holding herself back from something much bigger. I should have stopped her. I should have said something, anything, to break the spell we were under. But instead, I let myself kiss her back. The sheer intensity of it overwhelmed me. It had been years since anyone had touched me with this kind of raw hunger, and I couldn't ignore the way it made my pulse race. "Ava," I murmured against her lips, my voice shaky. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her dark eyes searching mine. "Tell me to stop," she said softly, her breath warm against my skin. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't want her to stop. We didn't make it far. Ava pushed me back gently, guiding me toward the bed with a confidence that made my heart pound. I stumbled slightly, my legs hitting the edge of the mattress as she followed, her hands never leaving my body. "This is crazy," I whispered, though my hands betrayed me, sliding up to rest on her shoulders. "Maybe," she said, a sly smile tugging at her lips. "But it feels good, doesn't it?" I couldn't argue with her. Every nerve in my body was alive, humming with a kind of electricity I hadn't felt in years. Her fingers brushed against the buttons of my shirt, pausing just long enough to give me a chance to stop her. When I didn't, she began undoing them, one by one, her gaze locked on mine the entire time. It felt surreal, like I was outside myself watching this unfold. I wasn't the kind of person who did things like this, especially not with someone like her. She was too young, too impulsive, and far too tied to my professional world. But when her hands slipped under the fabric, skimming over my skin, all those reasons vanished. When I woke up, the room was bathed in the soft golden light of early morning. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream, a vivid, impossible fantasy conjured by my overworked mind. But then I felt the weight beside me. Ava was lying on her side, her hair a tousled mess against the pillow, her bare shoulder peeking out from the blanket. She looked peaceful. Her face relaxed in a way I rarely saw during the day. Reality crashed down on me like a tidal wave. What had I done? I sat up slowly, careful not to wake her. My heart was racing, a mix of panic and disbelief. My thoughts spiraled as I tried to piece together what this meant, for me, for her, for the job I'd spent so many years building. But as I glanced back at her, all those thoughts faded into the background. She looked so vulnerable, so at ease. And in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to regret what had happened. Ava stirred just as I was pulling on my shirt, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw me, a slow smile spread across her face. "Morning," she said, her voice husky with sleep. "Morning," I replied, unsure of what else to say. She sat up, the blanket slipping down to reveal more of her bare skin. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the floor instead. "Don't look so guilty," she said, her tone teasing. "I'm not." "This shouldn't have happened," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why not?" she asked, tilting her head. I turned to face her, my chest tightening. "You know why. This is dangerous, Ava. Your father." "He doesn't need to know," she interrupted, her voice firm. "This is between us." Her confidence was both reassuring and terrifying. She didn't seem to grasp the full weight of what we'd done, or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "We can't let this happen again." Ava smirked, leaning back against the headboard. "You say that now, but we'll see." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Not because they felt like a threat, but because I knew she might be right. Back at the office, things felt different. Ava and I didn't speak about what had happened, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. Every time our eyes met, it felt like the room was charged with unspoken electricity. I told myself I would keep my distance, that I wouldn't let myself fall deeper into something I couldn't control. But Ava had other plans. She started finding reasons to be near me, dropping by my office under the pretense of needing advice, brushing her hand against mine when no one was looking, sending me text messages late at night that made my heart race. At first, I resisted. I reminded myself of all the reasons this was a bad idea, of all the ways it could go wrong. But Ava was relentless, and little by little, I started giving in. The next time it happened, it wasn't in a hotel suite or the privacy of my home. It was in the office, late one evening after everyone else had left. I was sitting at my desk, finishing up some reports, when she appeared in the doorway. "Working late?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with something I couldn't quite place. "Just trying to wrap things up," I said, my tone careful. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The sound of the latch clicking sent a shiver down my spine. "I missed you," she said, her words simple but loaded. "Ava," I started, but she crossed the room in 2 strides, silencing me with a kiss. It was risky, reckless, and entirely wrong. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The night in my office should have been a wake-up call. A clear reminder of just how dangerous this was. But it wasn't. If anything, it opened a floodgate I didn't know I was holding back. It didn't take long for our secret meetings to become routine. At first, we were cautious, stolen moments after work, a quick kiss behind the closed door of my office, her hand lingering on my arm as we passed in the hallway. But caution turned into boldness, and soon we were meeting in places we had no business being. The first truly reckless moment happened in the company parking lot. It was late, nearly everyone had gone home, and the building was bathed in the dim glow of streetlights. I was loading my laptop bag into the back seat of my car when I heard her voice behind me. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" Ava teased. I turned, startled to find her standing there. She was wearing a fitted blazer and skirt that made her look both professional and impossibly alluring. "I didn't think you were still here," I said, glancing around the empty lot. "I stayed late," she replied, stepping closer. Her heels clicked against the pavement, each sound sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. "Ava, someone could see us," I said, my voice low but urgent. She smirked, closing the distance between us. "Then you should probably tell me to stop." But I didn't. Before I could talk myself out of it, she grabbed the front of my shirt and pulled me into a kiss. My back pressed against the side of the car as her hands slid to my waist, her lips hot and insistent against mine. I knew it was reckless. Anyone could have walked out and seen us. But in that moment, the risk only made it more intoxicating. After that, the affair escalated quickly. We started meeting outside of work, finding excuses to be together in places where no one would think to look. Our favorite was a boutique hotel downtown, tucked away on a quiet side street where no one from the office would stumble upon us. It became our sanctuary, a place where we didn't have to pretend. The first time we met there, Ava had booked the room herself, texting me the details with a playful, "You owe me dinner for this." When I arrived, she was already waiting inside, lounging on the bed like she belonged there. "This feels like a bad movie plot," I said as I closed the door behind me. "Then let's make it a good one," she replied, her eyes gleaming. That night was the first time I allowed myself to fully let go. Away from the constraints of work and the ever-present fear of discovery, I gave in to everything I'd been holding back. Ava was electric, confident, unapologetic, and completely in control. She moved with a kind of intensity that made it impossible to think about anything else. Her hands on my skin, her breath warm against my neck, it was overwhelming in the best way possible. By the time I left the hotel that night, my body was spent, but my mind was buzzing with a mixture of exhilaration and guilt. It wasn't just physical. That was the part that scared me the most. The more time I spent with Ava, the more I found myself drawn to her in ways I hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just bold and fearless, she was thoughtful, curious, and surprisingly vulnerable when she let her guard down. One night, after another rendezvous at the hotel, we lay tangled in the sheets, the city lights spilling through the window. "Do you ever feel like you're stuck in a box?" she asked, her voice soft. "What do you mean?" I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Like everyone expects you to be a certain way, and no matter what you do, you can't break out of it." I hesitated, sensing this was more than just a casual question. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But isn't that just life?" She sighed, rolling onto her back. "I hate it. Everyone looks at me and sees my dad's daughter. No one takes me seriously, not even him. That's why I push so hard, why I don't care what people think." Her words struck a chord in me. I'd spent so many years living within the lines, doing what was expected, never rocking the boat. And here was Ava, tearing through life with a kind of reckless abandon that I both envied and feared. "You're more than what people see," I said finally. She turned to look at me, her eyes searching mine. "So are you." Of course, the more we pushed the boundaries, the closer we came to getting caught. One evening, I was in my office reviewing a proposal when Ava appeared in the doorway. It was late, most of the staff had gone home, but the building wasn't completely empty. She stepped inside without hesitation, closing the door behind her. "Ava, this isn't a good idea," I said, my voice low. "When has that ever stopped us?" she replied, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could, she crossed the room and kissed me. The kiss was brief, but it was enough to leave me breathless. As I pulled away, I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. We both froze, our eyes locking as the footsteps grew louder. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel Ava's hand tighten on my arm. The steps paused outside my door, then continued down the hall. As soon as they were gone, I exhaled shakily. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered. "Yes, we can," she said, her confidence unwavering. But even as she said it, I could see a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The close call didn't stop us, but it planted a seed of unease in my mind. The affair was starting to take its toll on me. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, worrying that someone would notice the way Ava and I lingered too long in meetings or exchanged subtle glances in the break room. It wasn't just the fear of being caught. It was the weight of what we were doing. The way it consumed my thoughts, the way it made me question everything I'd built for myself. But no matter how much I tried to pull back, Ava always found a way to pull me back in. The closer Ava and I became, the more difficult it was to keep the rest of the world at bay. Our secret felt like a living, breathing thing. A dangerous creature that threatened to claw its way into the open at any moment. At first, the thrill of secrecy had been intoxicating. The risk, the stolen moments, the way she could silence all my doubts with a single look. It had been enough to make me forget myself. But as the weeks turned into months, the pressure of keeping everything hidden began to weigh on me. And Ava? She seemed to thrive on the danger. It happened on a Thursday evening. Most of the staff had left for the day, and I was finishing up paperwork in my office. I'd been trying to keep my distance from Ava lately, convincing myself it was the responsible thing to do. But Ava wasn't one to let things go. She appeared in the doorway, her usual confidence radiating from her like a spotlight. "You're still here," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I didn't even look up from my desk. "You shouldn't be." "Relax," she said, closing the door behind her. "There's no one here." Her tone was playful, teasing, but there was an edge to it that made me nervous. "Ava," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to be careful." "We've been careful," she replied, walking around my desk until she was standing right beside me. "No one suspects a thing." I glanced up at her, and the look in her eyes stopped me cold. She wasn't just confident, she was challenging me, daring me to push her away. Before I could respond, she leaned down, her lips brushing against my neck. "Ava," I whispered, but my protest sounded weak even to me. "You worry too much," she murmured, her breath warm against my skin. And then the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. I pushed her away instinctively, my heart hammering in my chest. She stumbled back, her expression a mix of surprise and frustration. "Someone's coming," I hissed. Ava straightened her blazer, smoothing her hair as though nothing had happened. The footsteps grew louder, and a moment later, her father appeared in the doorway. "Claire," he said, nodding at me before turning to Ava. "You're still here? I thought you left hours ago." "I was just going over some campaign details with Claire," Ava replied smoothly, her voice steady. Her composure was flawless, but I could feel the blood draining from my face. "Good," her father said, oblivious to the tension in the room. "Keep up the hard work, both of you." He left as quickly as he'd appeared, but the damage had already been done. Ava turned to me, her expression unreadable. "You need to relax," she said quietly. "This isn't a game," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. She didn't respond, just gave me a small, knowing smile before walking out of the room. The close call shook me to my core. I spent the next few days avoiding Ava as much as possible, throwing myself into work in an attempt to distract myself from the mess I'd created. But Ava wasn't one to be ignored. She cornered me in the break room a few days later, her voice low and urgent. "Are you going to keep pretending I don't exist?" "I'm trying to protect us," I replied, glancing around nervously. "From what?" she asked, her frustration evident. "No one suspects anything." "Yet," I said firmly. "But they will if we're not careful." Her jaw tightened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "You're scared," she said finally. "Of course I'm scared," I said, my voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what will happen if this gets out? To me? To you?" She didn't answer, and for a moment the silence between us was deafening. The tension came to a head during another business trip. This time we were headed out of town to pitch a high-profile client, a make-or-break opportunity for the company. Ava and I both knew how important it was. And for the first time in weeks, we managed to keep things professional. At least at first. The first day went smoothly. We spent hours in meetings, perfecting our pitch and going over the finer details of the presentation. By the time we returned to the hotel, I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. I told Ava good night at the elevator, relieved that we'd managed to get through the day without any complications. But later that night, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, she was standing there, barefoot, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant. "I couldn't sleep," she said simply. "I should have sent her away. I should have told her to go back to her room and left it at that. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside and let her in." The next few hours were a blur of heated whispers and tangled sheets. The walls I'd been trying so hard to build came crashing down, and for a little while, nothing else mattered. But when it was over, the weight of what we were doing hit me harder than ever. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, while Ava watched me silently from the other side of the room. "This is getting too complicated," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't have to be," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "Yes, it does," I said, looking up at her. "We're walking a tightrope, Ava. And sooner or later, we're going to fall." Her expression hardened, and I could see the frustration building behind her eyes. "You're just scared," she said, echoing the words she'd spoken days before. "You're damn right I'm scared." I shot back, my voice rising. "Do you even realize what's at stake here? My job, my reputation, everything I've worked for could come crashing down because of this." "Because of me," she said quietly, her voice laced with bitterness. "That's not what I meant," I said, softening. "But it's what you're thinking," she replied, her eyes narrowing. I didn't know how to respond, and the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. The trip ended on a strained note, with both of us retreating into our own corners. Back at the office, the distance between us grew wider, and for the first time, I started to wonder if we'd reached the breaking point. Ava continued to show up at my office, her presence as magnetic as ever, but the dynamic between us had shifted. The playful teasing was gone, replaced by something darker, something more complicated. And for the first time since this all began, I started to ask myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. Was it worth it? The rift between Ava and me was impossible to ignore. At first, I thought it might pass. I convinced myself that a few days of space would be enough for both of us to regain some sense of normalcy. But as the days turned into weeks, the distance only grew, and the silence between us became suffocating. I threw myself into my work, avoiding her as much as possible. Late nights at the office became my refuge, a way to drown out the questions that kept swirling in my mind. Was this worth it? Could we keep going? Or had we already gone too far to turn back? Ava, on the other hand, seemed determined to push me. She wasn't cold or distant, far from it. She kept showing up, kept finding ways to remind me of what we'd shared. A lingering glance in the hallway, a casual hand brushing mine during a meeting, a late-night text with no words, just a photo of the city skyline from her apartment. It was as if she were daring me to admit I couldn't let go. It all came to a head one Friday evening. Most of the office had cleared out for the weekend, but I was still at my desk, poring over a stack of client proposals. The hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint tapping of my pen against the desk were the only sounds in the empty space. I didn't hear Ava come in until she was standing in my doorway. "You're avoiding me," she said, her voice calm but firm. I looked up, startled by her sudden appearance. "Ava, now isn't the time." "It's never the time," she interrupted, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. I sighed, setting my pen down. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to be honest," she said, crossing her arms. "Why are you pushing me away?" I hesitated, my chest tightening. "Because this is dangerous," I said finally, "and you know it." She took a step closer, her dark eyes locked on mine. "It wasn't dangerous when we were in that hotel room, or in your office, or the parking lot. It wasn't dangerous then, so why now?" "It was always dangerous," I replied, my voice rising. "But I was too caught up in the moment to see it. And now I can't ignore the risks." "What risks?" she demanded. "Your job? Your reputation?" "I get it, Claire, I do. But why does it always have to be about what you're afraid of losing? What about what we've gained? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What we've gained, I repeated, my voice trembling. Ava, this isn't sustainable. Us, it's a ticking time bomb. And when it explodes, it's not just going to take me down, it's going to take you with it. She shook her head, frustration flashing across her face. You're so focused on the worst-case scenario that you're missing the point. I care about you, Claire. And I know you care about me, even if you're too scared to admit it. I looked away, unable to meet her gaze. That's what this is about, isn't it? She said, her voice softer now. You're scared. Of course I'm scared, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've worked my whole life to build something stable, something I can rely on. And now it feels like I'm throwing it all away. Ava stepped closer, her hand brushing mine. You're not throwing anything away. You're taking a chance. And maybe it's messy, maybe it's complicated, but it's real. Isn't that worth something? Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The turning point came the following week. We were in a meeting with the executive team, discussing the upcoming campaign for one of our biggest clients. Ava sat across the table from me, her gaze occasionally flicking to mine. I tried to focus on the presentation, but I could feel the weight of her presence, the unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. After the meeting, I returned to my office, grateful for the reprieve. But the moment I sat down, there was a knock at the door. It was Ava. Can we talk? She asked, her voice quiet. I nodded, gesturing for her to come in. She closed the door behind her, then turned to face me, her expression unreadable. I can't do this anymore, she said. My heart sank. Ava, no, let me finish, she said, cutting me off. I can't keep fighting for this when you're not willing to meet me halfway. I've been trying, Claire. I've been trying so hard to make this work. But I can't do it alone. I stared at her, my chest tightening. I never wanted to hurt you, I said softly. You're not hurting me, she replied, her voice trembling. You're just not letting yourself feel what I know you're feeling. Her words cut deep, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. I care about you, I said finally. More than I should, but I can't ignore the risks, Ava. I can't pretend like this isn't going to blow up in our faces. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Then, maybe it's time to stop pretending. Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. After she left, the office felt emptier than ever. I tried to focus on my work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Ava. Her words, her touch, the way she'd looked at me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. I knew she was right. I'd let my fear hold me back, and in doing so, I'd pushed her away. But no matter how much I wanted to fix things, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was too late. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, the weight of what we'd lost settled over me. I knew I'd made the right decision, for my career, for my reputation, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss. And for the first time in years, I let myself cry. The days after Ava and I parted were heavier than I anticipated. I'd thought that by ending things, I would feel relief, like a weight had been lifted, like I'd finally taken control of a situation spiraling beyond my grasp. Instead, I felt hollow. Work didn't offer the escape I hoped for. The office, once a place of focus and purpose, had become a minefield of memories. Every glance at the conference room reminded me of her sharp wit during meetings, the way her lips would curve into a small smile when she knew she'd impressed someone. My own office felt suffocating, haunted by the ghost of her presence, her scent lingering in the air long after she'd gone. I avoided her as best I could, keeping our interactions strictly professional. She, to her credit, did the same. But every now and then I'd catch her watching me, her gaze softer, more resigned than before. It was a quiet reminder of what we'd shared, and what we'd lost. One morning, I arrived at work early, hoping to get a jump on the day before the usual chaos began. The office was still, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound as I settled at my desk. I was sifting through emails when a soft knock interrupted me. Ava stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She looked different, her usual confidence muted, replaced by something quieter, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" she asked. I hesitated, glancing at the stack of papers on my desk before nodding. "Of course." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. For a moment she didn't speak, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for the right words. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said finally. "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "For everything," she said, meeting my gaze. "For believing in me, for seeing more in me than just my dad's daughter." Her words caught me off guard, and I felt a lump form in my throat. "Ava, She held up a hand, stopping me. "I know this hasn't been easy, and I know I've made it harder than it needed to be. But I'm grateful for the time we had, even if it didn't end the way I wanted." Her honesty left me speechless. For all her boldness and confidence, Ava had rarely let herself be this vulnerable. "I'm grateful too," I said softly. She smiled faintly, a shadow of the bright, mischievous grin I'd come to know so well. "I think I needed you more than I realized," she admitted. "But I know now that I can't keep leaning on you. I need to figure things out for myself." Her words felt like both a goodbye and a promise. After that conversation, something shifted between us. We still worked together, still crossed paths in meetings and office corridors, but the tension that had once crackled between us was gone. In its place was something quieter, more respectful. A mutual understanding that we had given each other something valuable, even if it couldn't last. For the first time in weeks, I began to feel like I could breathe again. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, I started to reclaim my life. I found solace in the little things. A Saturday morning yoga class, an impromptu dinner with an old friend, an afternoon spent tending to the neglected garden outside my apartment. These small moments reminded me that life could be full, even without the intensity of what I'd shared with Ava. At work, I threw myself into new projects, determined to prove to myself that I could still excel without the distraction of our affair. And while it wasn't easy, I began to find my footing again. Ava, too, seemed to flourish in her own way. She started taking on more responsibilities, stepping out from her father's shadow to carve out a place for herself in the company. Watching her grow, I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride, even if my role in her journey was now firmly in the past. It was a crisp autumn evening when I saw her again, outside the context of work. I was sitting at a small cafe downtown, nursing a glass of wine and flipping through a book, when I heard her voice. "Claire?" I looked up, startled to see Ava standing a few feet away. She was dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, her hair swept back in a loose ponytail. "Ava," I said, setting my book aside. "Hi. Mind if I join you?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Not at all," I replied, smiling. She sat down, her movements relaxed but deliberate. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the quiet hum of the cafe filling the space between us. "You look good," she said finally, her tone warm but not flirtatious. "So do you," I replied. We talked for a while, the conversation easy and unforced. She told me about a new project she was leading at work, and I shared a few updates about my own life. It felt normal, comfortable even. As the evening wore on, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't sad anymore. Seeing her didn't hurt the way it once had. Instead, it felt like a reminder of how far I'd come and how far she had too. When it was time to leave, Ava walked me to my car. The air was cool, the city lights casting a soft glow over the street. "Take care of yourself, Claire," she said as we reached the curb. "You too," I replied, smiling. For a moment, it felt like she might say something more, but then she simply nodded and walked away. As I watched her disappear into the night, I felt a strange sense of peace. The relationship I'd shared with Ava was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was messy, complicated, and often overwhelming, but it had also been transformative. She had challenged me in ways I didn't know I needed, forcing me to confront parts of myself I'd long ignored. And while it hadn't lasted, it had left its mark. As I drove home that night, I found myself thinking about the future, not with fear or hesitation, but with quiet anticipation. I didn't know what was next, but for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out.